The knock came at 12:04 in the morning. Not urgent, not panicked. Just three quiet taps, the kind a person makes when they're hoping you'll answer and half hoping you won't. I was still awake. I had been awake for an hour already, sitting at my kitchen table with a cold cup of tea and a lease renewal I couldn't decide whether to sign. My name is Daniel Rowe. I'm 33, a structural engineer, and apparently the kind of man who spends his Saturday nights negotiating with paperwork instead of people. I opened the door expecting a noise complaint or a lost package. What I got was Mara Voss. She was standing in the hallway in a gray cable-knit sweater and paint-stained jeans, holding a small glass of wine she clearly hadn't finished, hair loose around her shoulders. She lived in the apartment directly across the hall. I had known her for 14 months the way you know someone who shares a building with you. Names, schedules, the specific sound of her keys and her lock. The fact that she painted in the evenings because that was when the light hit her windows right. She looked at me with the expression of someone who had rehearsed a sentence and forgotten it halfway to the door. Then she said, "Are you still awake?" Which was clearly true because I was standing in front of her. I said, "Apparently." She looked down at her wine glass. "I saw your light was on." "It usually is." Another pause. The hallway hum of the building settling around us. "I dropped something heavy," she finally said. "And I think I woke your neighbor below me, and now I feel terrible, and I don't know why I'm telling you this." I looked at her, the honest version of her standing in a hallway at midnight, admitting she didn't know why she had knocked. "You knocked because you saw my light," I said. She tilted her head. "That's almost poetic coming from a man in construction socks." I looked down. They were, in fact, wool socks with a small hammer pattern, a gift from my sister. I would be dealing with that detail for the rest of this story, apparently. "Come in," I said, before the building judges us. She stepped inside like she wasn't sure the invitation would hold. I made fresh tea. She sat at my kitchen table with her wine glass and looked around my apartment the way people do when they're trying to understand a person through their shelves. For 20 minutes, we talked the way neighbors talk when the hour is late enough to make honesty accidental. She told me she was working on a series of paintings for a gallery showing in the spring, that she hadn't slept well in weeks, that the gallery director kept using the word cohesive in emails that felt less like feedback and more like threats. I told her about the lease, how I had moved into this building after a long stretch of bad years, back when the city felt too large and my own apartment felt like the only manageable geography. How the lease renewal meant deciding whether this was still home or just the place I had landed. Mara listened the way she looked at things, fully, without filling the silence too quickly. "Why would you leave?" she asked. I looked at the table. "I haven't decided that I would. But you're thinking about it." "I think about it the way people think about anything they're afraid to lose." She went quiet at that, set her wine glass down and traced the edge of the table with one finger. Her nails had three different colors of paint near the cuticles: cadmium yellow, something blue, a deep complicated red. "I almost left last year," she said. "Where would you have gone?" "Anywhere the walls didn't feel like mine yet." I understood that. More than I wanted to admit across a kitchen table at half past midnight. She looked up. "What changed? For you?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because the truth was not dramatic. The truth was small. It was the sound of her keys across the hall at 10 in the evening, the specific signal that the building had settled back into itself. It was knowing her name and which window she painted beside. It was the way this apartment had started to feel like something I would miss if I left. I didn't say all of that. I said, "The building grew on me." Her mouth curved, not a full smile, something quieter. "The building," she repeated. "The neighborhood." She looked at me steadily. "The neighborhood." I looked back. "Some of the residents." She laughed then. A soft, real sound that landed somewhere between embarrassed and pleased. She covered it with her wine glass. I pretended not to notice. "I should go," she said. But she didn't move. "You could stay," I said. "There's tea." "That's a low-stakes offer. I specialize in low stakes." She looked at me for a moment that went a half second too long to be casual. Then she reached across the table and picked up the lease renewal. Turned it over once in her hands. "Have you read the small print?" "3 times. And it doesn't tell me anything the large print doesn't. Which is, that staying requires a decision." She set the paper down carefully. Her fingers stayed near it. Mine were 3 inches away. Neither of us moved. "I think," she said slowly, "that people who are afraid to stay somewhere usually know exactly why." Is that a diagnosis? "It's a theory. And what's yours?" "For me?" She looked at the lease again, then at me, direct in a way that made the kitchen feel smaller. "I think you already know what you want. You're just waiting to find out if it's allowed." That sentence sat between us like something fragile. I turned my teacup once. "That's either very insightful or I've told you more than I thought. You told me you think about losing this place like something you're afraid of. That's true of a lot of things." "Yes," she said quietly. "I know." The building shifted somewhere above us. A door closed on the floor overhead. The city moved outside my window in the low, steady way it always did after midnight. Mara stood. She picked up her wine glass, which was empty now, and held it loosely at her side. She looked at me the way she had looked at the lease, like she was trying to understand the architecture of something before committing to it. Sign it, she said. The lease. Yes. She moved toward the door. I'd like you to stay, she said it plainly, without performance. The way a person says something when they've stopped pretending it doesn't matter. I walked her to the door. We stood in the hallway for a moment, her side and mine, the same narrow corridor where 14 months of quiet proximity had apparently been building towards something I hadn't named. Until now. Thank you for the tea, she said. You didn't finish it. I'll owe you one. I'll remember that. She looked at me once more. Something in her expression shifted. Not open exactly, but no longer entirely guarded. Like a window that had been cracked just enough to let the temperature equalize. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Mara. She crossed the hall. Her key found the lock without looking. She paused inside her doorway. I saw your light, she said once more, not explaining. Confirming. I know, I said. She closed her door. I stood in the hallway for a moment in my hammer socks, listening to the building settle around me. Then I went back inside, sat down at my kitchen table, and picked up the pen. I signed the lease at 12:47 in the morning. Not because the small print had changed, not because I had solved anything, because the woman across the hall had knocked on my door when she didn't have to, stayed longer than she planned, and told me plainly that she wanted me to stay. Some decisions don't need more information than that. 3 weeks later, she brought the tea she owed me. She stood at my door at a reasonable hour this time, holding 2 cups she had made in her own kitchen, because she said mine ran too hot. I didn't argue the science, so we sat at the same table, talked until the tea cooled. At some point, she reached over and straightened the lease renewal, which I had left sitting out because I hadn't yet decided where to file it. Her fingers lingered on the corner. You signed it, she said. I did. She looked at the paper, then at me, that quiet, careful look she had, the one that saw more than it said. Good, she said simply. And for the first time in a long time, staying felt less like a compromise with fear and more like something I had chosen on purpose. Have you ever had a quiet moment with someone that said more than either of you planned? Tell me in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.